She's going.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Hi.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good.
Good. Tell me your name.
Kathleen,
Kathleen. How old are you?
65.
65. And tell me a little bit about yourself. What do you do for a living?
Okay, I'm a massage therapist. I've done that for about 25 years. And I retired. And now I mostly garden, make jewelry, and do photography.
Wow. So you're done with the work and you do what you enjoy.
Yes.
Did you like the work?
Pretty much, especially at first, but towards the end, I kind of got burned out on it.
What kind of hobbies do you have?
Well, gardening, photography, and cooking. I'm sure I've left something out. Jewelry making.
Jewelry. Great. Great. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Reading, Pennsylvania, which was kind of a small industrial city.
And how long did you live there for?
Until I graduated from high school, and then I moved to Atlanta.
Okay. So you've been here a while.
I have.
And you obviously like it because you're still here.
Yes.
Great, great. So tell me a little bit about your experience with depression. You talked a little bit that it's been in your world, and I'd love to hear a little bit of maybe how it started for you.
Right. Well, I think I was depressed from an early age, but I didn't know what it was. I just knew I was unhappy and sad and fretted a lot. When I actually called it depression was when I was in high school. And when I first went to see a therapist was when I was 19 years old.
Okay, 19 years old. What year would that have been, ballpark?
It would have been around 68 or 69, something like that.
And you said that you first suspected it when you were younger. What age was that?
It wasn't that I suspected it because I didn't think about those things. I didn't even know about depression. But looking back on it,
Okay.
I see that I was anxious and was sad a lot.
So when you look back, is that at 6, 10, 15?
I don't remember my really early years. I would say maybe it started around 6, 7 years old.
Okay. And then you started acknowledging it, to yourself when you were
in high school.
Mm-hmm. And you went to someone to speak to them?
No, not at that age. It wasn't until a couple of years later when I went into a really deep depression and anxiety that I sought help.
Okay. So when you look back and you were, very, very young, what do you look at it as? Was it an anxiety? Was it a depression?
It was a combination. I was depressed and anxious. I was just thinking about this the other day that I think every day of my life I felt anxiety and depression and fear of mostly fear about my mother because she was very abusive.
Do you think did your mom deal with depression? Is this hereditary for you?
Yes, she was depressed. She also experienced anxiety. She was hospitalized. She was put on and off medication most of her life. And she also got shock treatments.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, this is a long time ago.
Yeah. The last time I remember her getting a shock treatment must have been in the early 60s.
Okay. And so did she acknowledge that or talk about it?
She didn't really talk about it. The only time I ever heard her talk about it was, "You kids are going to drive me to the insane asylum again."
Right, right. And as a kid, you take that and that you run with it, right? You feel guilty.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I took her seriously. And I was the bad child, in the family. And so I definitely got that from her.
So do you remember when she went in the hospital?
I have no memory of it. No, because it seemed like there was a space of time from say after my youngest sister was born, she had a nervous breakdown, then, you know,
Your sister did or your mom?
no, mother.
But
And but I don't have recollection of that because I was too young. And then not again until I was 18 years old. But I wasn't living at home at that time. I was living with my father in New Jersey. And she had a breakdown and was hospitalized. And several times after that, she was hospitalized.
what caused your parents to get divorced? Divorced, I assume?
Yeah, oh, they are divorced, and they got divorced when I was 6 weeks old. And my mother always just said my father was really arrogant, but the story I get from my grandmother, my father's mother, is that my mother was really hard to live with, that she was, not, this wasn't her word, but my word, that she was a bitch.
Do you think that her mental health had to do with who she was and the way she portrayed herself in her relationship and with you children?
I think that hers started at a pretty young age, and I know it's hereditary because my grandfather had it too, and my grandfather was also addicted to morphine because that's what they prescribed back then for people who had migraine headaches. So he got addicted to it, and when he would go through withdrawals, I heard that it was a nightmare and that it was my mother's job to take care of him.
Oh, she turned into the parent.
Yeah.
Right, right. So it's definitely hereditary.
Yes.
Do you have your siblings deal with it?
No, my sister Diana has never been depressed and has no problems with insomnia like I do. And with my older sister Susan, same thing. I seem to be the one who inherited
Lucky you.
that gene, yes.
So your grandmother seems to have been the person that was able to talk about what was going on. She shared things with you. She had dealt with her.
I didn't know my grandmother.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, I never met her. She died fairly young. I think she was in her late 40s and died of a stroke. And what I've heard about her is that she was very cold. Not affectionate, very cold, a real German kind of woman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you said something a minute ago that a story that you heard from someone.
Oh yeah, that was from my aunt.
Okay, your aunt.
Yes.
So was your aunt kind of on the outside looking in? Was she able to give you perspective of the family dynamic before you know?
I've heard bits and pieces from her and from my uncle Robert, and I kind of pieced it together from what they've said. Now my uncle seemed to like to talk about it more than my aunt, and he was very philosophical and, you know, talked about my mother's problems. And he was the one who was kind of her caretaker when she would go through these depressions.
What do you know what her depressions were like for her? What she did when she was in them?
I only ever saw her where she was actually in an episode one time, and she was in bed. She normally bleached her hair blonde, and she had let it grow out, and she cried all the time and said that she wanted to die, but she was afraid to, but she couldn't live either.
How old were you at the time?
At the time, I think I was 18.
18. So you're an adult, but
Mhm.
also dealing with your own mental health issues.
Yes.
What do you do with that? How does that, when your mom says that to you?
I just heard what she said, internalized it, helped give me some understanding about why I was the way I was.
Oh, you did make that connection?
Yes, I did.
So do you feel that your family, you're chemically predisposed?
I do think so, yes. Because if it was just environmental, then I would think my sister would have issues with depression. I think that I inherited that chemistry, that gene for depression.
And do you think that the nurture part of it, the exposure that you had to your mom's illness, and your grandfather dealt with it as well, it kind of trickles down a little bit.
Hmm.
What is that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I know that my grandfather, would be pretty much incapacitated by his episodes. My mother was pretty much like that too. Um, I've had a difficult time with depression, anxiety, and I've been hospitalized for it. But my daughter has it mildly, and my grandchildren don't seem to have it all. So I'm hoping it's like, started off as like a waterfall, and now it's trickling down to nothing.
Right. How much do you think there's more chemistry or nurture?
Oh, both, definitely. There's the chemistry, but my mother was very verbally and physically abusive of me. Not sexually abusive, but I think I've looked back and thought I was hit every day of my life.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And yelled at and called names, belittled, that sort of thing.
So your self-esteem obviously was
Oh, rock bottom.
pretty shattered.
Yes.
And do you think that fed into the depression, or do you think the depression amplified that?
I think it worked both ways. I mean, there was the abuse at home, and that made me very shy, very quiet, afraid of other people, always thinking that other people would judge me, because of my shyness and my emotional swings. So, yeah.
So let's go back to your 18.
Uh-huh.
You went through your 4 years of high school and
Yes.
you struggled.
Yes.
What was your struggle like? What were your days like, or your weeks or months?
Okay. Let's start at middle school, because that's when I remember really.
Anytime there were,
Yeah.
go back to elementary school if it's significant.
Okay,
Go
all right.
back as far as you want.
But I was very shy and withdrawn. But there was always a part of me that wanted, to like really be active in all kinds of ways. I wanted to go out for sports. My mother wouldn't let me because she wanted me to be home to do the housework and chores. And I didn't do well in school because I had ADD. I couldn't focus. There were too many problems at home for me to be able to concentrate on my work. So I didn't do well at all and thought I was stupid, and was teased by the other kids for being skinny. I was snaggletooth because I used to have a big gap in the front. And I had to wear my sister's hand-me-down clothes, which never fit. And, I was such an easy target
Right.
to pick
What
on.
could possibly go wrong?
Yeah. So, so that made all my school years really difficult.
Sure.
Yeah.
Was it like torture? Like when you got up in the morning, did you?
I would dread going to school, right? But it was just something I had to do. I had a few friends, but not many, and when school was over, I just wanted to hurry up and get home. Well, it's funny because, I didn't like being at school. I didn't like being at home.
I was just gonna ask that. Like in summer vacation, when you woke up in the morning, how did you feel about getting out of bed?
Actually, it was better then because I was a tomboy and I really liked going out and playing with the neighborhood kids. Now, with the neighborhood kids that I grew up with, I played with them a lot and we got along good. And we had a community swimming pool, and I would go there every day. So I really enjoyed summers. I didn't have to deal with that social pressure that I had at school.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So elementary school.
Yeah, that was elementary. Then in middle school, at the community pool, there was a hierarchy. The really popular kids sat up here, the next, on down. So we were actually second tier, my friends and I, but the kids up above us would poke fun at us and throw spitballs and things like that. But there are always those kids below us,
Right.
who are even worse off than us. So, so middle school was hard and high school was hard until I moved to New Jersey to live with my father for a year. I'd become too much to handle for my mother, so she asked my father to take me. Now, in that high school, I wasn't popular, but I did have a crowd of kids that I fit in with, and we used to have a really fun time together.
Great. So it was almost like a starting from scratch, maybe.
Yeah, it was. But I didn't have the history.
Yeah.
By then, I had a job and was buying my own clothes, so I dressed nicely. I learned how to do my hair and makeup, and I still didn't do great academically. That pattern had been established a long time ago, and so I barely graduated from high school.
Well, there was no such thing as ADD.
There's
Back
no
then.
such. Oh yeah, back then
There
they
was
didn't
no-
know anything about it.
Yeah.
I couldn't concentrate, but I always loved to read, and I had the concentration
Yeah.
for that. That I think is what saved me.
Yeah, that's probably what got you by.
Yeah, because it was an escape. I first discovered books when I was in, I think, 5th grade, and Nancy Drew was really popular at the time, and my neighbor had all
The Hardy
the
Boys.
Nancy Drew books.
Yeah.
Never read Hardy Boys, but Nancy Drew and Sherry Ames. It was it was like a book about nurses.
Mhm.
So anyway, that I discovered my escape and how I could live vicariously through books.
Right. So was it a constant thing, or did you go to them when you weren't feeling well?
Now, I read most of the time, as I do now. I always have a book with me.
And did you read educational things or fiction or?
Oh, it was mostly fiction. Now I read both, but in elementary through high school, it was definitely fiction.
Right.
In fact, I didn't really get into nonfiction books until after my divorce, and so I was in my late 20s and early 30s, and then it was more in the way of self-help books.
Why did you get divorced?
Because I was never happily married, and I finally, after 7 years of marriage, got to a place where I felt strong enough to be able to leave.
So your mental health didn't have anything to do with it, or his mental health?
No, his mental health was good, and while mine was not great, I functioned pretty well throughout my married years. We fought a lot and argued a lot, and I think a lot of that came out of my insecurities. But I'm sorry, I forget what the question was.
I was looking to see if the cost of depression. That's what I was kind of looking for, to see if your depression, your anxiety, contributed to your marriage not surviving. But it sounds like you just argued a lot and wasn't a good fit.
It wasn't a good fit. He was very domineering, but it served a purpose. He was security. He was like a normal kind of guy who came from a fairly normal background, and he was a student at Georgia Tech, and it just felt like,
Oh, this is amazing for
Yeah.
you. This is not.
yeah, it
This
was
is like
security.
Yeah.
My mother was a waitress, and my stepfather was a blue-collar worker. And here's a guy who's in college, who seems normal, who is interested in me.
Right.
So I thought I'd won the jackpot.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure. That's great.
But the reality of it was that we weren't well matched.
Right.
And I was always more artsy, and I had big ideas, big dreams, and Bill was much more down to earth. And
So tell me a little bit about your first aha moment when you said to yourself, okay, this is depression. I need to go speak to someone.
I don't know that it was an aha moment. It was that I went into a really deep depression and anxiety, and I knew that I needed help. And so I had no idea where to find help. I went to the Yellow Pages, looked under psychologists, and just chose one. Turned out he was an educational psychologist, and he said, "Oh, just put a smile on your face and you will feel better." So
How'd that work for you?
did not work. I
Okay.
just said, okay, I'm just gonna have to bite the bullet and deal with this on my own.
Right.
And oddly, I never told Bill, who at that time was just my boyfriend, I wasn't married to him yet, but I don't think he even realized I was in a depression. I didn't talk about it to him because I was so ashamed of myself for being depressed and anxious, like I was this crazy person.
So it was simply not talked about
Yep.
in the marriage, throughout the entire marriage. And
Throughout most of the marriage, Bill did not like talking about that kind of stuff. He was in denial, and you know, if I would start going into one of those moods, you know, it was just kind of like, I mean, I didn't talk about it much either because I could feel that he didn't want to talk about it.
Mhm.
So it was all
Yeah,
internalized.
you said you were ashamed of it.
And I was ashamed of, you know, I saw myself as mentally ill, and you know, what a stigma that had attached to it.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
Who wants
so,
to say that to themselves, let alone somebody else?
yeah, exactly.
Describe deep? You use deep depression. You've used that term.
It
quite a
was
bit.
like I didn't want to live. I just felt darkness all around me, sadness, there was no hope. And then but not only did I have that, I had extreme anxiety. And it was a generalized anxiety. It wasn't like I thought about something and it made me anxious.
You're just anxious.
I was just extremely anxious.
And describe that. Describe your anxiety.
Anxiety is really hard to explain to someone who's never experienced it, but I always describe it like it felt like being on the edge of a precipice and not knowing, but knowing that at any moment somebody could come and push me over.
Mm.
So it was a really intense anxiety where I wasn't comfortable in my own skin, so it didn't matter where I was. I could be home, I could be outside, and always felt extremely anxious and fearful. I would be afraid I'd yell out something inappropriate, you know?
Really? Wow. Now,
Just-
so you always experienced them together, depression and anxiety?
Yeah, well, when I was younger, it was just depression, and I think I felt anxious, but it wasn't the crippling kind of anxiety. You know, it was just mild anxiety about having to go to school and facing the teasing that I would get. And it wasn't until I was actually out of high school that I had my first extreme anxiety episode, which was when I looked up the doctor in the phone book.
Oh, so it was an anxiety that triggered
Anxiety
you
and
make-
depression.
And depression.
It was both.
But it was the anxiety ultimately that.
Anxiety has always been much worse for me than the depression. Yeah.
Are you able to differentiate because there's physiological and psychological experiences, I'm sure, with both, right?
Yes.
Are you able to decipher which is which? Like, are you sometimes more depressed, less anxious, more anxious, less depressed?
Oh yeah, I can definitely determine the difference. And even while I'm going through an episode, well, oftentimes actually when I'm in an episode, it feels like it's all anxiety, but my psychiatrist and therapist help me to identify the depression too.
Through interviews? They just
Through,
ask you questions?
yeah, through therapy, through talking.
So I'm trying to figure out how to word this. The depression, you use the word episode.
Yes.
You're in an episode. So if you thought of a television show being an episode, there's the beginning and the end.
Right.
Can you describe that?
Well, the beginning would just happen like that.
That you'd already be there?
I would be fine one day, and the next day it seemed at the time that I would just flip over into the anxiety and depression. And then when I got over it, it would end just as quickly as it had begun. But between the two times, there was no up and down. It was always full-blown anxiety and depression.
So, just so I'm clear, the beginning of the episode is you're already in the depression, or you're fine, and then something turns.
That
Okay.
fine, and something turns. What I didn't realize at the time, because I thought, why am I feeling this way? I don't deserve this. I didn't do anything wrong. You know, why is God, you know, cursing me with this? And this was before I'd ever gotten into any serious therapy. And then once I was in therapy, I realized that it was kind of like post-traumatic stress disorder, you know, from my childhood and all the abuse from it, you know, the peer pressure at school, and that maybe something was going on in my life at you know, at that time that I wasn't happy with, but I wasn't really dealing with. And then it would just take me to that breaking point.
Right. So how long were your episodes, average?
Well, before I started taking medication, they would last about 6 months.
Wow.
It wasn't an episode, it was a season.
Yeah. Now out on DVD.
Right.
What? So were they ever short, or were they always really, really long?
The only one time I had a short episode, and that was I must have been in my late 20s, and I had my daughter, and I had been through a series of little flings, and the very last guy I was with was somebody I would never in my right mind have considered having a sexual relationship with. And I did, and I just woke up one day in a state of anxiety and depression, and I thought, oh no, this can't happen. You know, my daughter's only 4 or 5 years old. I got to take care of her. I have no one to help me. And my housemate at the time asked me if I wanted to drive down to West Georgia College with her. She was going to a party, and so I went and, you know, got drunk. By the time I woke up the next morning, I was fine. So I don't know if it, like, maybe her showing interest in me and wanting to include me in this experience with her, you know, helped me. You know, a lot of my anxieties about rejection and not being loved.
Did you abuse? You said sexual encounters. You did some things. Was there any abuse that you, or not abuse? You know, use of drugs, acting out sexually. You know, were there any things that you escaped to other than books?
Oh, I became pretty promiscuous. So at the time I rationalized it away, you know, so this was now the women's movement and birth control,
Right.
and, you know, it seemed like everybody I knew was having, you know, sexual experiences, and I wanted that too, and so I just went for it.
But really, it was just feeling your need to be loved.
To be loved,
not
yeah,
rejected.
yeah.
And felt good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always felt good. I always thought of sex and my relationships as a drug.
Yeah.
You know, it made me feel good. And
Sure.
so, but, you know, the feel good starts tapering off, and so I would break up with that person and find the next guy.
Because you don't want to be alone
Yeah.
in the between. So there's no alcohol or drugs or anything that you...
Nope, never really got into drugs. I mean, I experimented a little, and, you know, on the weekend, go out partying and get drunk, but, you know, it never approached alcoholism.
Right. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being suicidal, ready to jump off of a building, and then 10, my world is great, don't need to touch anything, everything's good. Where was your average, where did you usually live at?
Where I normally lived at was actually probably like an 8. You know, in between my so-called episodes, I was fine. and I actually went 27 years without having any depression or anxiety. And that was between when I divorced my ex-husband and then when I was 45, my daughter had left home because, you know, it was time to.
Time to go.
Yeah, and I remember that my psychiatrist at the time was really surprised I had gone so long without depression or anxiety because that's, you know,
That's
not usually
huge.
the pattern.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you know, I certainly had my lows, but never anything critical, you
Look
know.
like regular lows, like everybody has a
Yeah,
low.
like everybody has their lows.
Right.
And there were times I would get anxious, but that would be more over something real like finals coming up. So,
Okay, so you were having. I want to ask. There's 27 years you were on medication, right?
no, I
You
was
were
not on medication. No.
Okay. So the medication started at 45.
Yes.
So for 27 years, just stopped.
Yeah, I did. I always attributed it to the fact that I got out of a marriage I was not happy in.
Mm-hmm.
And it was during the time of the women's movement when it was really strong, and so I was feeling more self-empowered.
Mm.
I got into group therapy. I was a member of a women's group. I was doing a lot to try and help myself to rise above all.
You're in the game.
Yeah.
You're in the game. So interesting though, if you have chemical imbalance
Yeah.
that you're predisposed to depression, and then 27 years goes by without it.
I know. It's amazing. I mean, I'm amazed now. I mean, now you know, when I think about myself, I think myself as someone prone to depression and anxiety. But during those 27 years, you know, I was a bit of a loose cannon maybe, but I never like felt extreme depression or anxiety like I did before and like I did after. It was really a pretty happy time for me. I was raising my daughter, who I really loved and adored, and I was working. I was putting myself through college. You know, me who had almost flunked out of high school,
Yeah.
and you know, I'm maintaining a 3.3 average through college, so I was feeling good about myself. I had girlfriends. I was dating. You know.
So how do you explain? So we'll do this in 3 parts. There's
Okay.
the beginning, which was struggle.
Yes.
There's the middle,
Yes.
which was not, and then there's, well, I won't say the end because you're still here and you're not dealing with it now.
Right.
But how do you reconcile that? Do you look back and go, "Wow, that was awful," and now look back and like really appreciate the fact that you're not going through it? Or is there fear that you might go back to it?
I would occasionally feel fear, but the more time passed, the more I felt, wow, I got over that. I'm not going to have depression or anxiety anymore because I'm living a life where I'm much more empowered and having fun and enjoying myself for the most part. I mean, I went through a lot of relationships, and I know that's part of what kept me up, you know.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Sure. So how do you explain the 27 years as far as the chemical imbalance?
I just don't know what to say about that. You know, it's to me is kind of, yeah, it really was. Oh, and I also had really gotten into health foods, and I was eating really healthfully, and I think that also
definitely.
helped some.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Were you exercising, or were you?
Yeah, I started exercising.
Okay.
I started exercising in my early 30s. So the exercise and eating healthfully and doing a lot of new age stuff.
And were you still in therapy as well?
And I was in therapy, yes.
So you were doing basically everything except for the medication.
Yes,
Wow.
exactly. And then I was 45 when I had another depression and anxiety, and who knows what caused that. I had a facelift, and it freaked me out that I had done that.
After you did it,
Yes.
you had buyer's remorse.
Right. And I remember that when it happened, I mean, it was like one day I was fine, and the next day I was right back in the middle of that depression and anxiety. And I thought, how unfair. Here I had this facelift to help me feel good about myself, and instead I'm ending up on the 8th floor of Grady Hospital, for 5 weeks because of the extreme depression and anxiety. Now, my therapist there said that she thought it might have to do with the fact that I was going through menopause and doubting my womanhood, my femininity, and my desirability, that, I had gone to get this facelift to make myself feel better about the way that I looked. And a relationship that I'd been in like for 2 years ended, and that was before I had the facelift. And I had the facelift, and my face swelled up like a pumpkin, and I had little slits for eyes. My nose, I looked so horrible, and I couldn't go anywhere. I wasn't about to go outside and have everybody see me look like that.
Right.
So I sequestered myself at home, and just, I was just left. I had all that time by myself to think about what I had done, and I felt terrible guilt about spending so much money on a facelift, and feeling like I was being extremely vain, and it just overwhelmed me.
So, at what point did you realize you were slipping?
I think it was like the second day after the facelift, and I noticed that I was having a hard time sleeping, and my appetite had changed, which those are always the first indication that something's going on. And I thought, oh, well, that's only normal because I just went through this major surgery. But then I woke up one day, and in the middle of the night actually, with extreme anxiety. And I was staying with my brother-in-law and sister at the time. They both worked during the day. So I was left there by myself, and I started getting suicidal, and I didn't know what to do. And my sister, who's very non-judgmental and very loving, she was very supportive of me, but she was saying that my mood swings were hard to handle. Because like for a few minutes I it's over. And then it would just start back again. So that's the only time I've ever had the mood swings where I could go from good, feeling okay, to feeling really miserable.
Right. What was it like for you to realize you were getting back 27 years of
I just couldn't believe it. I just felt it was so unfair. I felt cheated. Like, why is this happening to me now? I'm supposed to be happy, and I'm feeling this horrible anxiety and depression. Oh yeah, my granddaughter had been born that summer. And so, it was a combination of things. My daughter and her husband weren't getting along great, and I was so worried that he would not be a good husband or father, with the new baby. So there was that, the facelift, feeling trapped in my sister's house, and feeling like there was no place I could go to, but I had to get out of there because I was afraid I'd kill myself. And so my brother-in-law at that time was working at Grady Hospital. He was a physician's assistant, and he suggested that I go there, and I said, I don't want to go to Grady. That place is horrible. It's a nightmare. I can't do that. Can't I go to Northside or something? And he said, well, do you have health insurance? And I said, no. He said, well, I'm afraid Grady's your choice. But I felt okay doing it because he worked there, and he would come by and visit me every day. my daughter came to visit me, my sister, so, that helped. And actually the hospital experience was much better than I thought it would be.
Were you embarrassed to be there?
Oh yeah, I was very embarrassed and ashamed. I didn't want anybody to know, but word gets out. By that time, I had a lot of friends, knew a lot of people, because I was the opposite of how I was through high school. I had become very outgoing and knew everybody in little 5 points, and I thought, oh, I don't want them to know that this has happened to me. I was so afraid that it would get out, but as far as I know, it never did. That my family, respected my desire for privacy around that.
Right. Was it weird when people came to visit you, or even for
Yeah,
them? Was it
well,
awkward? Like, what did you say?
it felt awkward, and I was embarrassed, but at the same time, I was also glad that they had come to visit me. That they cared enough to come visit.
Right. And after that initial visit, when they come back, it wasn't there, probably, right? Or
Not
was it
as
still?
much, no. Mm-mm.
Right. And you were there for 5 weeks, you said?
5 weeks. They don't do that anymore. Now, you go in for a day or two, and they put you on medication and send you home.
Out the door.
So I was really glad for the 5 weeks. I did not want to leave until my anxiety was gone. And I kept worrying about it, saying, don't make me leave. Please don't make me leave. Usually, most of the people who were there, they wanted to get out as fast as they could. And I just said, just lock the door and throw the key away until I'm better.
Right. So 27 years goes by, boom,
Uh-huh.
you're back dealing with depression and anxiety. Did you experience it differently? Was it the same as you had left it?
I think that after the 27 years, my granddaughter had been born, and I remember feeling at the time, I've got to get better for her and for my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
I can feel the tears coming.
That's great. Okay, it's okay.
It was just such a sad time for me because I've been so excited, about Maya being born, and I wanted to be a good mother and a good grandmother. There I was in a mental hospital, and I felt like I was letting my daughter down and not there for her support.
So, let's go to the 1 to 10 scale again.
The 1
to 10 scale.
Oh yes.
So you operated at an 8 when things were
Most
good.
of the time.
Most of the time. Where did you operate into that depression?
1 or 2. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned suicide.
Yeah, I could not see the light at the end of the tunnel. I just thought everybody would be better off if I were dead, and I would escape the pain, the anxiety and depression. It wasn't like I thought, I'm so sad, I want to kill myself. It was like the anxiety was unbearable, just unbearable.
In what way?
The physical part of it, the mental part of it, the emotion, all of it. It was just more than I could bear. I felt like I was going to go crazy, like I was going to go absolutely insane if the anxiety didn't stop. But it was like my anxiety was turned on to a 10, full volume. And I couldn't sleep, so it was never turned off. It was like 24/7. I went through that anxiety.
Would you choose depression over anxiety if you could?
Oh, yes. But maybe if I was mostly depressed, I'd say I'd rather. No, but I think I would rather have depression, definitely, than anxiety. I mean, there were times when I was in high school, I would get depressed. Like I said, it wasn't like serious depression, but it, very sad feelings and feeling like it was going to be like that forever.
Mm-hmm.
But then in a day or two, I'd be over it.
Right. So, describe a 6-month period
No.
that you're depressed. What is, describe like a day or a week or a month.
Um, it would be, well, I would hardly sleep. I would wake up and be full of anxiety, but I still had to make myself function. So I did. I went through the daily activities, like say after my daughter was born, I went through an episode and my husband went off to work and I was left alone with my daughter feeling this extreme anxiety and depression. But for her sake, you know, I still fed her, played with her, walked her in her carriage, you know, just went through all the motions of life. But every moment, you know, there was these obsessive thoughts about suicide and feeling the anxiety and feeling guilty because I felt, you know, new mothers, they're supposed to be happy. This is like one of the happiest days of their lives. Of course, I've learned since then that there's a lot of new mothers who go through depression and anxiety. Mine was just a really extreme degree of it.
Right, right.
And I cooked dinner for my husband and, you know, just...
But it was a chore.
What?
It was a chore. Like everything was you like push yourself.
I just had to make myself do it.
It wasn't like, oh, I want to go to the park and you know, stroll my daughter in a carriage and then go home and make dinner for my husband.
Right.
It was like, oh, I gotta. Right?
It was like I was a robot that had been programmed.
Yeah. You mentioned suicide again, and you used the word obsessive. Why did you never kill yourself?
Because I was afraid of the unknown. Yeah.
Even as painful as it was,
painful as it was, it would mean defeat, giving up, and who knows what's on the other side. What if there is a hell? You know, and I'll burn forever because I was raised Catholic. You know, if you kill yourself, that's a mortal sin, and you go to hell for it. So, yeah, just too afraid of death.
What do you think the difference is between you who thought about suicide but never did it, and then somebody who thinks about it and actually goes through with it?
I just think they must get, it's hard to imagine, but they must get to a worse level of depression and anxiety that I did, and there was nothing, they felt like there was nothing in their life to live for. For me, what was to live for was that I had a daughter. And I didn't want her to grow up knowing that her mother committed suicide. Yeah. So, I guess there was some hope. I mean, even though at the time it felt like there was no light at the end of the tunnel, I mean, part of me knew that I had had this before and gotten over it. But still, when you're right in the middle of it, it feels like it's going to be that way forever.
Right.
And even knowing that it was 6 months, the duration was usually 6 months, the thought of going just even another minute with that anxiety and depression was pretty hard to bear. Yeah.
So, when you hear of someone that kills themselves, how do you experience it? Do you experience it any differently than you think others do?
Well, when I hear about it, I just think of how horrible, how sad and depressed and no hope, you know. How could they actually get to the point of taking their life?
Do you judge them, or are you jealous of them?
Oh, no, I don't think I judge or am certainly not jealous of them, but it's more of an empathetic feeling, you know, just knowing that they felt that bad that they could actually take their lives.
Right. So how do you... In your 6 months, your 6 month period, you're just going through the motion. What was your experience with your family or your friends? Were people aware? Did you hide it?
I didn't tell anybody.
Nobody.
I mean, when it happened after my daughter was born, I did tell my husband that, you know, I had to. He had to know that I was going through this, and I did get to go to see a psychiatrist, so that was good. He wanted to put me on some kind of drugs, but at the time, I didn't want to do that. I didn't like the idea of taking prescriptive medicine, so I didn't take it. Well, actually, he gave me a sample, and I took it, and it made me feel so weird. I just flushed the stuff down the toilet.
Right.
So.
And so that was when you were first introduced to medication. Like the medication that you started taking was later.
Yeah, I was 45
You're 45,
when I started
right? That's
taking
right.
it.
And you're still married at this point. So during the 6 months, did you ever think it's got to stop? It's got to end at some point.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go back up. I always do eventually. Did that go through your head?
I would think that, but it didn't help.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that, but mental illness is a strange thing, and I know it comes in many forms, but when I'm there, I can't, even though I know intellectually that I will get over this on an emotional and physical level, it feels like it's going to be forever, or I just can't take more than 5 minutes of it. But then 5 minutes would go by, and I'm still here.
So
a day would go by, a week, like.
And you're at a 1 or 2 at this point, like barely functioning.
Yeah.
Right, and you're normally at an 8. So when you're at an 8 and you're looking around your world, and your world is bright pink, everything's great,
Uh-huh.
That's real for you.
Yes.
You look around and you're able to say things are great,
Oh, yeah.
things are pink. And then all of a sudden, something happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to talk about the transition of that next, but something happens, you go down to 1 or 2,
Uh-huh.
and everything's black.
Uh-huh.
Is that real for you as well?
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember the pink?
I remember that I was there, but I discount it. When I'm in the depression and anxiety, I think I wasn't really happy.
Right.
I was really depressed. I was really anxious. I don't see it as real, like it was somehow fake.
Mm-hmm.
But when I'm feeling good, then it all feels very real to me. And what I realize too is that even if you are healthy and happy, you do always have moments of doubt, and
Oh, yeah.
insecurity or
Sure.
feeling depressed. But I would take that as a sign that I was never really happy.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you were up, you'd look back at where you were and think that wasn't reality either. So each
I
place,
knew it was very real for me, and it was something I wanted to avoid at all costs.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Some people would say that's crazy. You're like, you got your reality over here, and
Uh-huh.
you got reality over there,
Uh-huh.
and you're in your head going, that's not right, that's not right.
Uh-huh.
What do you say to someone who doesn't experience that says what's wrong with you?
Right. Well, I guess nobody ever has thought that. I mean, or at least they haven't said that, expressed that to me, because both of those are actually real. It's just that when I'm so depressed and anxious, I don't have a grasp of reality. I can't be rational in the way that I think about the way it was before or what's going to come in the future. That's one of the things about mental illness, is that a lot of it is very irrational. Yes.
Yeah. So, triggers. Talk about triggers. You're going about your day in your pink world, and all of a sudden, boom, you're in the black. Do you know when it's happening, or you just find yourself there?
Most of the time, there's been a definite trigger. Like when I was 18, I had given up a child for adoption. That's what triggered my first major depression and anxiety. Then it was the next time it happened was when my second daughter was born. And so that was the trigger then. The third time was when my ex-husband had gone through graduate school. I was his wife during all this time. He went through graduate school, went through the military, and it was exciting to be looking towards the future for like when he graduated, when he got out of the military, like things are going to get better and better and better. And then he got out of the military, got settled in a job, we bought a house, and I just saw my life. I visually saw each calendar page turning and turning and turning, and me being unhappy and miserable and bored. And that's when I had the next episode. We had gone to Europe. He had finished the military, finished graduate school, finished the military. We went to Europe for a month. We got back and, bought the house. And that's when I, flipped over into the depression and anxiety again. And I went to the hospital that time for about a week at Northside Hospital. And they put me on Valium, which worked for a couple of days, and then my body adapted to it. It never really did help. And so I, went back home and again went through my robotic moves until I got better.
Your deepest, darkest moment.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do? Like you're not with the baby, you're not with your husband, you're not doing anything. You're just.
It's all just such an internal thing of, this constant thinking, obsessing about how I'm feeling. My psychiatrist would say that instead of talking about what's really going on with you, you're obsessing over your symptoms. So it was kind of like that, always on in my head, not going into, eventually I did, but, going into my childhood and the patterns that had been established, that sort of thing.
Did you cry?
I couldn't cry when I was in the depths of anxiety and depression. The only time, actually, I cried one time, and that was when my daughter moved out of the house. I think I told you about that the other day.
Yep.
When she moved out of the house and took the 2 kids with her, and I felt abandoned. It was repeating a very old pattern.
Right. Unloved. Unwanted.
Rejected.
Yeah.
Because I can't remember if I told you, but my mother put me in an orphanage when I was little, from 3 to 6 years old.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I hardly have any memories of it. The main memory I have is standing in, it was like a deep windowsill, big arched window with stained glass, because it was a Catholic orphanage. And so I remember standing on the windowsill and watching my mother and her new husband driving down the road away from the orphanage, and that I was just crying and sobbing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that, that's where these feelings of rejection and abandonment and being unlovable came from, was, I believe, during that time. And then when she took me out, she was mentally imbalanced and was abusive right from the beginning. And yelling, she was a screamer.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So I would be so ashamed of her. When she'd start screaming, I would run around the house and close all the windows because I didn't want the neighbors to hear.
Yeah. Sure. So, what got you out? Were there any triggers to send you back up?
Well, it all depended. Like, the first time was when, the very first time I got depressed was after I'd given my child up for adoption. And during that period of depression, anxiety, we had gotten married, and I wasn't getting happily married, and I was feeling the anxiety and depression, but it wasn't quite as intense as it had been. Things had started mellowing out, but when we moved to Philadelphia for him to go to graduate school, then that flipped me to better. It was a change, a dramatic change. The second time, it was when he got his orders to go into the military, and we were going to be stationed in Arizona. I mean, it was amazing. I'd been horribly depressed and anxious the day before. When I found that out, snapped me right out of it.
Right.
I mean, it was the dramatic change. It's instead of like feeling like this is going on forever and ever and ever, then there's this dramatic change to a place that seemed exotic and,
Yeah.
different. And, I think all the other times it was medication that got me out of it.
So, you're on medication now,
Yes,
and you've been on the same medication for how long?
it's been about 20 years.
20 years. And it worked.
It works.
It worked. You have no side effects.
Well, my memory, it definitely has affected my memory, and physically, I put weight on. I am normally a really skinny person, but the imipramine definitely increased my appetite and slowed my metabolism down.
Okay. But well worth it.
Any day.
Right.
Yes.
So, do you ever get concerned about history repeating itself?
Sure. Especially my mother was my age now when she went into a mental institution and never came out again.
Oh, really?
And
She just broke down.
yeah. But medication is much better these days. And my mother never reached a point of feeling self-empowered where I have. I mean, my life changed dramatically and is so different from hers that I believe I will make it, especially through the help of medication.
Sure.
But of course, there are those times that I do worry, like, say, like if my daughter and I aren't getting along, and I'm not seeing my grandkids, and maybe not everything's great at home with my housemates, and I start getting down on myself, and then I think, thank God I'm on medication, because this could be something that could send me over the edge normally.
Right.
But that doesn't usually last very long, that feeling like, just this sense of feeling like I can just barely feel the anxiety breaking through, but it doesn't. Yeah.
So, do you find over the years there's been, no one talked about it in the family? You were dealing with it but not sharing it with people, but you understood that it was there, you're acknowledging it. And it seems like as the time went on, you became more open about it, comfortable with it, incorporated it into your life. What was that like to start sharing it with people? Like people coming to see you in the hospital. It's kind of like, it's a big step.
It was really freeing to be able to talk about it to people. And, I had gotten into therapy, both one-on-one and in group therapy, and where I had always thought, it's only me. Why me? Why do I have to be the one who experiences depression and anxiety, and everybody else is so happy? But when I got into group therapy and everybody started sharing, I realized it wasn't just me, that a lot of people and then with the advent of talk shows like Oprah,
Right.
And it was talked about so freely on there, it was like, wow, this is not as abnormal as I thought it was, and that I could actually be helpful to people who have been through it, by letting them know about my experience with it, and for them to not feel isolated and alone.
Is that why you're doing this?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, thinking that it could help someone. Also, it feels good talking about it because I don't talk about it a lot. I don't want to bring people down talking about my depression and anxiety. And when I use the word "my," I think to myself, I should not own it that way. I should call it the depression and
Why is that?
anxiety. Because I'm in therapy, that we've talked about that when you say it's mine, you're owning it too much, and by calling it the, it makes it more like something that you're experiencing and can get over. But if it's mine,
Is it part of you?
well, I mean, it definitely is a part of me, sure. I mean, I experienced it.
Right. Okay. Why do you think it's so difficult for people? Well, I mean, pretty easy to understand why it's difficult for folks that deal with it to reach out. Why is it so difficult for people that don't deal with it to reach out to the person that is dealing with it?
Because they don't understand it. When you're talking about this feeling, I assume you're talking about someone who's not going through depression.
Like your husband.
Yeah, right.
In a different day and age, your husband might have been able
To talk about it with me.
Right, but that's not the case. Why is that?
Well, in his case, I think it was because he felt somewhat guilty about it, because what initiated my very first episode was having to give up a child for adoption, which I didn't want to do, but he insisted that we do. And so I always blamed him for that, made him a very wrong person for doing that. And thinking, why am I with him? Why am I staying with him? Sometimes I feel like I don't even like him, But I did that out of insecurity, because at the time he did at least represent that.
Sure.
Yeah.
How about the rest of the world? Parents to children, siblings?
I think they're afraid of it, that they don't understand it. They think if you're having mental problems, you're going to be somebody like that guy out in Aurora, Colorado. They think that you might hurt them, or that it might be contagious. I think they sometimes have that feeling, a fear of like, if we talk about this, I might get it, or maybe it reminds them of something they have felt in the past that's fearful for them to acknowledge.
Right. What do you think it would take to get both depressed people that deal with anxiety or any kind of mental illness, to be able to come out, if you will, and be open about it, like you're being right now, and then also the people that don't deal with it, that have a loved one that it's clearly present in their world. What will it take to make that happen?
Well, it definitely takes communication on a lot of levels, education. That's certainly what helped me, was through going through therapy and then hearing other people talk freely about it, whether it was somebody I knew or whether it was Oprah talking about it. Now they have Dr. Drew and Dr. Phil, and they're all talking about these things. And so mental illness is no longer the boogaboo that it used to be, and that a lot of people experience stress. And now with the economy being the way it is, there are a lot of people struggling with depression because they're losing their jobs and not being able to find a job. And
when you see or hear of a celebrity that talks about their depression, what does that do anything for you?
It somehow makes me feel better about it. Like, oh, so even somebody who is successful and rich, has had to go through this. And then when they go through it and come out strong, like, what was that actress? I can't think of her name, but Tom Cruise made a big deal about her getting postpartum blues. Brooke Shields.
Yeah.
That was it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, because when I went through my postpartum blues, which was really more like an episode of depression and anxiety, I thought I was such a bad mother because, you know, I was going through this. And all other mothers seemed so happy. And then you read about someone like Brooke Shields, you know, who seemed to be a happy person, successful person, married. And, you know, she went through postpartum blues. Well, maybe I'm not so weird after all.
Right. Right. Yeah. So do you think if somebody sees this video with you talking about it, that it might do something for them seeing, you know, a regular person?
It could. I wouldn't want anybody I know to see it because I still do have a little bit of embarrassment and shame about having to take medication in order to, you know, have an even keel emotionally.
What would you say to someone, because you clearly have quite a bit of bravery,
Uh-huh.
you know, clearly. What would you say to someone who would like to talk about it, would like to seek some help, educate a family member, ask for support, but can't get over that hurdle? What would you say to them?
I would say that communication is definitely the way to lessen their fear of their mental illness. That talking about it, you've got to just take that first leap of faith, you know, that somebody is interested and wants to listen. You know, I'm sure I could think about that more and come up with some other ideas, but for me, that's what it was. Like, well, I was so desperate that I wasn't afraid of getting into therapy. I was a little bit afraid of group therapy, but my psychiatrist really encouraged me to do it, so I did. And when I found the acceptance of other people and learning that they also had this experience, I would say that initial group therapy that I went through was one of the most helpful things for me to get over my shame of what I was going through.
Because they were all there as well.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
And I would assume there must have been a camaraderie. I am not alone.
Yes.
I may be a little crazy, but they're crazy too.
They are too, and maybe they're even a little crazier.
Right. So, is that something? So you're a big proponent of that. What would you say to a family member where it's not being discussed? It's very clear there's something up.
Yeah.
The depressed person is not talking about it to their loved one, and the loved one has no idea how to bring it up, or maybe they've even tried, but what would you say to them?
If this was somebody that I knew personally, I would just encourage them to talk about it. That not only, you know, would it help them to understand that person's issue, but it would help the person too to feel much better. And that by communicating with each other about their problem, then, you know, the stigma seems to melt away and you can feel closer to the person, and the kind of fears that they have around somebody that they love being mentally ill just I think get alleviated by the ability to communicate.
If you were to encounter a 13-year-old boy or girl at a party, at a family reunion, whatever, and you had a conversation with them, and you kind of picked up that they were dealing with depression, and they maybe even spoke of it in some way with you, what would you say to them?
Well, I've had similar experiences to that. I encourage them to call me anytime they feel the need to talk about it. And then I would also encourage them to get some help from a therapist. That would do wonders for them.
If you were to describe your depression depression or your anxiety in one word, what would it be?
Nightmare.
That was quick. That was really quick. Any benefits to depression and anxiety?
Well, actually, yes, because you learn more about yourself. That's what my very first psychiatrist told me. He said, I know you can't see it this way right now, but it's really like you've been given a pearl. Because if you had gone all your life the way you'd been before, there wouldn't have been growth or development. By going through it, it caused me to look much more deeply into who I was and into who I am. And I can't even begin to tell you how much I've grown since my first breakdown, and that I live a much richer and fuller life than I ever could have imagined when I was 18.
Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah.
How about the cost?
How about the what?
The cost.
The cost?
The negatives.
Yeah,
The benefits.
I know what you mean. I'm trying to think what the costs are. Well, there's the obvious misery of it, of feeling depressed and anxious. There's time lost. The 6 months when I wasn't in therapy and I was just going through the anxiety and depression. Just the total disorientation and just not feeling connected to anything, not even feeling connected to myself. There's that loss. I felt like I missed out on the wonder of being a new mother because of the depression and anxiety. Yeah.
That's a big cost.
Yeah.
So if you had the opportunity at the stage to talk to everybody on the planet, every single person was going to listen to you, and the topic was depression, what would you want to share with them about it?
Well, pretty much what I've just shared with you, but I would share with them that there is hope, that there is always hope, even when you're in your deepest, darkest depression, where you feel like you can't even go another second, that there is hope, that things do get better. Even if I had never taken medication, I still would have gotten over it. I see that now. The medication made it happen faster. But yeah, and to not see it as a shameful thing, that to be able to share with others, it's an opportunity to help educate other people about what depression is.
And you have done that.
Yes, I have. I have on many an occasion.
I appreciate your time.
Thank you. That's my phone, isn't it?
It is. So was it brutal?